Donald Trump ended up becoming kind of the logical end to a lot of this anti-institutionalism. And people are going, you know what? Never mind. I don't need that. I'd rather kind of work within the system to fix this stuff as opposed to taking a sledgehammer to it.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. A few months ago, the Canadian Conservative Party, led by Pierre Poilievre, was cruising toward a massive victory in the upcoming Canadian elections. Most polls showed him holding a 20-point lead over his Liberal opponent. But what a difference an American election makes. Since Trump's musings about annexing Canada and his sweeping trade war against the country, polls have shifted decisively in favor of the Liberal Party, now led by Prime Minister Mark Carney. With Canadian elections just a few weeks away on April 28th, I knew I wanted to speak with one of my favorite explainers of all things Canada, journalist Justin Ling. He's written for numerous outlets, created some amazing podcasts, and is the author of the Bug-Eyed and Shameless newsletter on Substack. I caught up with Justin from his car as he was leaving a Poilievre rally at a steel coil plant in Ontario, just on the other side of the U.S. border. We spoke one day after Trump's latest global tariff announcements, which hit Canada hard. In our conversation, Justin explains the current state of Canadian politics in the Trump era and more broadly, how Trump's moves against Canada are rallying Canadians in unexpected ways, sparking a surge of national pride and solidarity in defiance of the threat from their powerful neighbor to the south. It's a fascinating conversation that reveals how Trump's bluster is reshaping Canadian politics and culture in real time. We recorded our conversation live via Substack, and if you'd like to join one of these live recordings, please be sure to subscribe to globaldispatches.org. There are about 500 people on this live taping, and folks have an opportunity to ask us questions at the end. I'd so appreciate your support. Now here is my conversation with journalist Justin Ling of the Bug-Eyed and Shameless newsletter on Substack. So pray tell, Justin, where are you right now and why are you speaking to me from a car?
I'm in South Lancaster, Ontario, literally on the border between Quebec and Ontario. I can see America right now, actually, from across the water, and some Canada geese. So there's lots of symbolism going on. But yes, I'm in a car because I'm just coming back from a campaign event with the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, in Kingston, Ontario, and I'm heading back home to Montreal, and I'll be trying to make it to another Pierre Poilievre event tomorrow in Trois-Rivières, Quebec, which is kind of on the other side of the province. So this is the Canadian campaign, constantly driving down to like one long strip that is the country.
So this is a very significant day for the politics of Canada. We are speaking just a few weeks ahead of the April 28th elections.
Yeah, so I mean, in particular, Pierre Poilievre has been in this really unenviable position for the last 2 weeks, which is that, he had prepped a campaign that he's no longer able to run, right? Because Donald Trump has completely upended the entire Canadian political system, especially this campaign. And so Pierre Poilievre has been scrambling, to try and find a way to sort of speak to the current chaos and anxiety that we're facing right now. And his event today was basically, they make steel coils, and it's the kind of the perfect epitome of the cross-border supply chains that Canada relies on. This facility basically takes in aluminum and steel that's made in Quebec, that is processed in America, that takes this back into Canada and then produces it into this highly specialized type of steel coil and rod and whatnot. And they're going to get probably hit very, very hard by these tariffs. 25% steel and aluminum tariffs will probably mean that we're seeing a 25% surcharge applied both when they head into America and when they head back into Canada. So, we're looking at quite genuinely a 50% increase in this specialized type of steel coil that is clearly useful in a whole bunch of industrial settings.
So, what was the nature of Poilievre's speech today?
The message, he's kind of throwing a lot of stuff at the wall, right? So everybody's sort of jockeying to figure out how we ought to respond to Donald Trump. From the beginning, when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was still in office, and then later our new Prime Minister Mark Carney, both have tried to sort of negotiate an end to it. And for some reason, Pierre Poilievre today sort of reiterated his desire to get at the table, to offer a sort of renewed version of CUSMA, the post NAFTA agreement that Donald Trump himself signed. So Pierre Poilievre basically says, I'm willing to stop the retaliatory tariffs against America whenever you're ready to deal, Mr. Trump, which was kind of quixotic in its own right. But on top of that, he announced a new tax cut for made in Canada cars. So a sort of good bit of buy local initiative. And that was basically it. Then this is a very Canadian campaign thing. Every single event has some new little piece of tax break or whatever that slowly kind of add up into an entire election platform. But today's event was not exactly a big one, let's say, but it's all kind of meant to add to this general ethos of we're ready to respond. We have plans to kind of shore up our economy. And by the way, we're looking for new trading partners.
I mean, what's wild to me, just kind of viewing this election from afar, is that not long ago, Poilievre and the Conservatives were projected to just sweep and dominate this election. They were leading in polls by like double digits. And then Trump came along, and the latest polls that I've seen, and there's been some of them that have come out over the last couple of days, show the Liberals and Mark Carney leading by double digits at this point. And this swing in such a short period of time is something unlike I've ever seen, like anywhere, in politics, anywhere in the world. It really is a transformative moment in Canadian politics.
Yeah, so listen, I mean, there's really the before Trump and the after Trump era, and not even his election, but really his inauguration and the start of the talk about making Canada the 51st state, right? So, the night that Donald Trump was elected, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was still in office. He was deeply, deeply unpopular. He was slated to like basically send his party into electoral oblivion when the election was finally slated to happen. But there was this moment where the election night in America, I know that a lot of the people who work for Justin Trudeau were sitting around saying, this is great for us, right? Like, this is going to be a game changer for us. This is going to secure our reelection. And I think everyone maybe rightfully laughed at them. You fast forward 2 months to Donald Trump's inauguration, and this conversation about not just the 51st state, but the threat of these steep tariffs, and suddenly this invented concern that Canada is importing and pumping in fentanyl into America and all this other stuff, you start seeing this very sudden shift in the public's voting intentions. And it literally, you see the conservative line go all the way down and the liberal line go all the way up. And it was one of the most dramatic polling reversals we've ever seen in Canadian history. There's been a couple other examples of this, but this is probably the most dramatic. And it really kind of just goes to the fact that Pierre Poilievre's message, so the Conservative Party's message, was just wildly maladapted for this moment. They were running an affordability campaign. They were running a Canada First campaign. They were running an effort to talk about housing and taxes, and really this kind of anti-woke, anti-liberal, anti-leftist, anti-globalist campaign that just all of a sudden everyone thought was completely ill-suited for the crisis we're finding ourselves in. And at the same time, Mark Carney, this, our new prime minister, starts kind of exuding this sort of stability and competence and confidence. He's the former governor of the Bank of Canada and the former governor of the Bank of England. He is pretty well known in the country as well as kind of abroad to some degree. And he is immediately on TV, trying to negotiate with Trump, trying to put together a kind of global response. He jets over to the UK and France to start talking about new trade agreements and new defense pacts. He announces a kind of a brand new military radar system he acquired from Australia. Like there's just this moment of, okay, this guy has his hands in the reins. And the vast majority of the country just immediately starts telling pollsters, this is the guy I want negotiating for us. This is the guy I trust to deal with the ramifications. This is the guy I trust to negotiate with our allies. And the election is kind of shaping up, as of right now, lots of stuff may yet change. The election is shaping up right now to be a stunning liberal victory.
I mean, again, it's just like worth emphasizing how wild that is. I often take like a global view of politics, and I just expected Canada to be the latest in the wave of anti-incumbent elections that have swept the globe from here in the United States to India to the United Kingdom to Germany to a certain extent. And it was just this kind of enduring global trend. But now you have like the chaos and the exogenous like shock of Trump's policies on trade that seem to be shifting the political calculus and the political mood around the world. And frankly, Canada might very well be like a bellwether for how other mostly Western liberal countries, the politics in those countries are shaped in response to this trade war.
That's probably about right. It doesn't help that the Conservative Party, which and Canada's Conservative Party, draws its roots to the UK Tory Party. It was formerly the Progressive Conservative Party. It was always sort of ensconced in this pro-business, center-right, institutionalist sort of ethos. There's a lot of changes that changed that, but Pierre Poilievre became leader of this party with sort of a promise to undo a lot of that history. And with this real anti-woke, anti-liberal, anti-globalist, populist message. And there's a lot of differences between that and Donald Trump. There's a really easy, lazy comparison that can be made between the two. And it's not quite accurate, right? Like they're not the same person. There's a lot of big differences between the two of them. But it doesn't help that there are these sort of at least surface level similarities between Donald Trump and between Pierre Poilievre, and he can't escape that, right? And like it is a refrain that is repeated by many Canadians. The phrase maple MAGA has been used a number of times over the last couple of months, and it's just a hard thing to get away from. And so I think Canadians have sort of put aside their disgruntlement to some degree with the way things have gone, right? Because Canada is facing many of the same problems as the US, Australia, the UK, everywhere else, right? Home prices are too high. Inflation has been too high. Our institutions aren't working as well as they used to. Government doesn't seem to be effective at producing the things it used to be able to produce. And people are just tired and they want change, right? And I think that is still the case. But I think a lot of people are sort of saying, listen, things are not great, but things are a lot better without someone showing up to wreck the institutions that we still have at least somewhat working. And I think that's kind of it. I think it was a wake up call. I think to some degree, Donald Trump ended up becoming kind of the logical end to a lot of this anti institutionalism. And people are going, you know what? Never mind. I don't need that. I'd rather kind of work within the system to fix this stuff as opposed to taking a sledgehammer to it.
So you mentioned earlier that you are just out of a campaign event and press conference with Poilievre outside like a steel coil plant on the border with the United States. We're speaking, Liberation Day +1, April 3rd, day after Trump announced these massive tariffs across the world, including impacting Canada. What has been the nature of the response by Mark Carney thus far?
Canada's response has been pretty decisive, I think, all things considered. I phrase this like the prisoner's dilemma. Every country in the world that has been visited previously by tariffs and that are now being attacked with tariffs as of yesterday has the same sort of dilemma, which is, do we try and strike a deal and undercut our allies, or do we try and create a common front and impose economic and diplomatic and social penalties on America in hopes of either convincing Trump to drop the trade war or in hopes of leveraging and helping the Democrats and more moderate Republicans, right? Like that's the calculus fundamentally. So Canada always had the option of saying, okay, listen, we don't want to be the 51st state, but we will renegotiate or maybe even tear up CUSMA, the new NAFTA, and do a bilateral deal that gives America some of what it wants, that gives Trump enough wins where we can say, we can get out from under this thing. And we kind of tried that initially under Trudeau. He made this offer to do all of this sort of border investments and to talk about renegotiating CUSMA in hopes of giving Trump a win. It didn't do any good. We got the tariffs anyway. We've had our steel and aluminum sector targeted. We've had our lumber sector targeted, and now our auto manufacturing sector targeted, which is billions and billions and billions of dollars of cross-border trade. So, in light of that, the response, as the baton was passed to Mark Carney, the response scaled up into dollar for dollar retaliatory tariffs. And those tariffs are not meant to be across the board. They're meant to target sectors of the US economy that will feel that pain more acutely and that can communicate that pain more pointedly to Republican lawmakers. So, bourbon.
I mean, that's what happens when you have such a close trading partner with so many cross-cultural and political, knowledge between, Canadians know America really well. Americans might not know Canada very well, but your average Canadian could talk to you at length about American politics. And surely you have generations upon generations of Canadian expertise and trade expertise. They know exactly the right levers to hit, exactly, what distilleries in Bourbon County, Kentucky might give Mitch McConnell pause. And that's something that I think a lot of maybe America's adversaries don't have, but American allies like Canada, they really do have this deep knowledge and frankly, cultural affiliation and familiarity with the United States and political familiarity with the United States. So their countermeasures from Canada are going to be much more precise and potentially much more effective.
I think you're also going to wind up seeing a lot of social pressure enacted as well. So, on top of the government level response, which is going to cause, I think, acute pain, especially in deep red states, you're also seeing a sort of cultural backlash and a kind of population level boycott. So, I stopped in to grab a quick lunch at this local brewery not far as Kingston, and they've pivoted into making all Canadian beer, right? They've eliminated American ingredients from their brewing process. You're starting to see a travel boycott. There's been a 70% reduction in Canadian travel bookings to the US. They've already removed hundreds of thousands of seats of flights going from the US to Canada, right? You're already seeing American campgrounds having booking canceled from Canadians who normally go down south, RV camps as well. You're starting to see, events that normally pull in a bunch of Canadians suddenly, half booked. You're going to see, I think, the really dramatic social pressure implications of this trade war. And if you start compounding that to include the French and the British and the Australians and Mexicans and everybody else, I think you're going to wind up not only with a sort of sectoral level economic pain caused by disrupting these supply chains, you're going to wind up with a sort of removal of those human to human ties that really otherwise make America one of the most effective powers in the world. And that's going to be dramatic. And you're already starting to see some of that pain get felt by small businesses across the US.
So I'm an American of Canadian derivation. My people all come from Montreal. So I do have, I think, some insights potentially into the Canadian psyche that your average American might not. And I just have seen this cultural transformation underway in Canada. I think here in the United States, we have a version of patriotism that doesn't potentially include the idea that other countries might be patriotic. And also, our kind of conception of patriotism tends to be rooted in cheerleading for America and the American flag, rah, rah, America, that old South Park gag, America, fuck yeah. That's I think the more kind of popular conception of patriotism in America. But in a sense in Canada, Canadians are equally as patriotic, but potentially their patriotism is now showing in a way that's rooted more in this kind of collective sense of solidarity. We're in it together. And so let's band together. It's neighbor helping neighbor, as opposed to this kind of more individualistic American kind of patriotism. And it's, what the United States is doing now seems to be arousing that kind of social solidarity in Canada, which, I think is a cultural transformation that's fascinating for me to view from afar.
So it's funny because I don't think Canada is a terribly capital P patriotic country, right? It is maybe a proud country. It's a country that I think it has investment in its existence as a nation, but it's also a deeply federal country. It's a deeply polarized country. It's a deeply regional country. There's a lot of provincial kind of pride. It's complicated, suffice to say. And let me just briefly say, like, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made this comment years ago that Canada is in some ways the first post-national country. And he got a lot of flack for it, but he wasn't entirely wrong. Like, it's a country that does not always think first and foremost about being a nation state, which you can unpack that for ages. But suffice it to say, like, that's kind of where we were. And you also had this increasing frustration with the existence of the country. There's been this phrase that Pierre Poilievre has used for years now that is Canada is broken. That basically the fundamental conceit of this country is not really working as designed. And separatism both in the West and in Quebec has risen over the last couple of years because of that. So we actually did kind of have a patriotism problem to some degree coming into this election and coming into Donald Trump. Donald Trump has fixed that for us, right? Like, we now have patriotism again. And it's funny because patriotism in Canada has always been tied to an existential threat from America, right? Like, our existence as a country to some degree, we exist because of the threat of American manifest destiny on the continent. We have an east to west railroad, and we're able to welcome in the Western provinces because of the existential threat of American invasion towards the end of the 19th century. Our sort of collective unity was again sort of defined in the post World War II era, post World War I era, basically by not being lumped into America. And so it's a really fascinating way in which American threats always are the thing that really bring us together, and Trump is just kind of playing into that hand yet again.
And, again, as you said, it's like expressed through this kind of rejection of buy American, that people are trying to buy Canadian. And it seems there are like kind of minor scandals popping up every day in Canada where like governments like, still procure things from the United States. Like I saw in the Montreal Gazette that I was like preparing for this interview that like either the city of Montreal or the province of Quebec, was still buying like Brita water filters that were manufactured in the United States. And this is like front page news. Like, how can you be buying Brita water filters? We're buying Canadian now. And that just seems to be so illustrative of this kind of moment that Canada is in right now.
Yeah, that's totally it. And I mean, I can't tell you the degree to which everyone's on board with this. Like, I mean, I'm finding myself going through the grocery aisle and going, oh no, iceberg lettuce grown in America? Never mind. Like, and the degree to which everyone's doing that, it's really shocking. Like, it is ubiquitous to hear people talking about trying to replace American purchases with Canadian ones. And I kind of can't remember the degree to which, I mean, like, maybe you have to go back to even the Iraq War is not a good example because there were Canadians who supported the Iraq War, right? I genuinely don't know that there is a modern example of the country being sort of this on the same page. Like, maybe early COVID is probably the most one-to-one example you can get, but at least then the existential threat was from the natural world, not from our closest trading partner and ally. The unity is pretty exceptional, and I think it's only going to increase in the coming weeks and months, and you might already be seeing kind of the consequence of this. I mean, Donald Trump had the opportunity to jack up tariffs on Canada yesterday, and he even previewed it in his speech in the Rose Garden yesterday. He took aim at Quebec dairy farmers as being one of the worst culprits of bigger than thy neighbor policies against America, and yet he didn't actually increase tariffs on Canada yesterday. So I do kind of wonder if there has been an effect on his administration and whether or not they've sort of realized the sort of beast they've waken up to some degree.
So we are speaking 25 days before the Canadian elections on April 28th. As we said, there has been this huge and massive and unprecedented swing from a conservative sweep to potentially a liberal sweep of the government and Prime Minister Mark Carney getting elected or reelected, I suppose. Between now and then, what are you looking towards in Canadian politics that might further shape the contours of this race and potentially like the outcome?
The big question today is, have we eked out a sort of reprieve, right? So the Premier of Alberta, who is, I think, more than any other politician in Canada, sympathetic to Donald Trump and sympathetic to the MAGA movement, she sort of proclaimed victory yesterday after Donald Trump did not increase tariffs any further on Canada, excluding the fact that auto tariffs came online yesterday morning. So she sort of claimed victory and said, like, well, finally we're moving past this. And there's sort of some little murmuring amongst conservative circles that perhaps the existential threat has sort of ebbed a little bit, and then maybe Canadians will kind of go back to the baseline issues that plagued them before Donald Trump came in and sort of stuck his fingers in this election. And that's possible. And I think that's something to watch for, right? It is conceivable that Donald Trump will define the first 2 weeks of the campaign, but not the last three. Could be. Although the counterpoint to that is Donald Trump yesterday suggested that there would be more tariffs coming on Canada and that we're not out of the woods yet, and that there would be sector by sector tariffs targeting Canada, which will be, I think, even further sort of chaotic and may even kind of worsen the anti-American sentiment in Canada. So, like, what Donald Trump does, I think, will be a huge deciding factor on what happens next. Now, beyond that, like I said at the beginning, Pierre Poilievre sort of issue, which is, like, how do you pivot to talking about this? He had a campaign all ready to go. They've been building it for 3 years, and they're having a very hard time abandoning that campaign in favor of one that's going to actually meet the moment. They're very slowly turning this tanker around in the Suez Canal, but it kind of feels like they're getting stuck. So what they decide to do will be a big question. And then finally, there's Mark Carney. I mean, he has very effectively offered a break from Justin Trudeau, at least in the eyes of voters. He has managed to kind of project competence and confidence, and people have believed it. But also, he hasn't really been road tested yet. Like, he's a really interesting dude in that he has this really impressive CV, but he also has a real petulant streak to him and has been known to get sort of testy and angry with people. And we've started seeing a little inklings of that coming out, but it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch during the campaign. But, I think from this moment at this juncture, it really feels like this election is going to be the question: who has the best plan and who has the best temperament to go toe to toe with Donald Trump? And Canadians ask that question by every single pollster in the field, asked a bunch of different ways, keep saying, I think Mark Carney's that guy.
Justin, do you have a couple more minutes? Do you want to take questions from people in the crowd?
I see one. Who can influence Donald Trump is a question I really like. Just because I wrote a thing on my Substack a few weeks ago before this got really intense, basically saying, if you want to understand Donald Trump's trade policy, stop looking at Donald Trump, stop looking at any economist. There's one guy, and his name is Peter Navarro. He's the U.S. trade representative. He's a hangover from the first Trump administration. He went to jail for refusing to testify against Donald Trump. And to my mind, he is the brainchild of this entire tariff regime. He's written book after book after book about it. And he's fascinating because he's a trained economist who used to write about the threat of tariffs. He used to write about how tariffs caused the Great Depression. He used to write about how tariffs, especially when employed by China, were economic warfare that had to be avoided. He is now writing books saying the only way Donald Trump can keep this mega movement going, the only way we counter China, is to tariff the entire world. And to my mind, the only person whose opinion matters on this issue is Peter Navarro.
Justin, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.